Washington Journal continues.
And we are back. Joining us this morning from West Newton, Massachusetts is Jessica Vaughan, who is the Policy Studies Director for the Center for Immigration Studies. Ms. Vaughan, what is your group and your stance on immigration?
We're a research institute that studies the effects of immigration on American society, and we study immigration policy and demographics and labor market and fiscal costs, really refugees, the whole waterfront of immigration policy from the standpoint of the national interest and trying to promote policies that work for our country and for Americans rather than for special interests.
So what does that mean then? Are you conservative, libertarian, progressive? How would you define it?
Well, the immigration issue doesn't really fall into the usual ideological categories. We are nonpartisan and we have conservatives and liberals on our staff. What our motivation is to find an immigration policy that works for the country, and our research has shown that immigration levels right now are too high, too skewed toward immigrants that are going to struggle to be self-sufficient in the country, and also too much illegality. So we think that there's a need for more immigration enforcement.
What is a sanctuary city, and how does your group view those cities and the impact of it on this country?
A sanctuary city is one that has a policy or ordinance, or it can be a state or county. Any jurisdiction that has a policy or practice that undermines the federal government's ability to enforce immigration laws. So, and that it specifically deliberately tried to make it more difficult for the federal enforcement agencies to get custody of deportable individuals, usually criminals, and otherwise interfere with their ability to do their job. There are about 300 of these jurisdictions across the country that we found through our research, most notably the state of California, which has adopted some policies that went into effect in January. The legislature passed 3 laws and the governor signed them that go farther than any other part of the country has gone before. I mean, sanctuaries have been around since the 80s, but have never had this, have gone this far in trying to deliberately obstruct the work of the federal government.
The Attorney General has responded by saying this week the Justice Department, the U.S., would sue the state of California over these laws. What are these laws?
Well, there are 3 of them. One of them would prohibit law enforcement agencies from cooperating fully with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol. The other prohibits employers from cooperating with ICE in doing worksite operations to go after illegal employers and illegal workers. And the third one tries to regulate or provide oversight of ICE detention of criminal aliens that happens within California.
So 3 laws that the U.S. government is going after California for. What is the basis for this? Is there precedent here for the U.S. government to sue a state over this issue?
There definitely is, and there are a number of cases that have been decided, and there are some existing federal laws that give the Trump administration some very solid legal footing on which to bring this lawsuit. The most recent example is the lawsuit against the state of Arizona that was decided by the Supreme Court in 2012. The state of Arizona passed some laws that wanted to allow the state to assist the federal government in enforcing immigration laws and make sure that they were enforced very rigorously in Arizona. The Supreme Court ruled that states can only go so far. They may not interfere with the way the federal government wants to enforce immigration laws, because the Constitution gives the federal government authority and responsibility over immigration laws so that there will be a uniform immigration law across the entire country. And they said that Arizona's went too far in a number of ways. There's another case back that was raised in 1996 when Congress passed a law that said no state or local government can prohibit its officials from communicating with federal immigration authorities. And the city of New York, which had a sanctuary policy at that time, sued over that law that Congress passed, and they ultimately lost in the Supreme Court also. So I think there's some very strong precedent here.
What is the Supremacy Clause?
The Supremacy Clause says that, establishes that federal laws are superior. In other words, they trump state and local laws. And again, immigration in particular is one in which there's an obvious need for the federal government to be the controlling authority.
I want to invite our viewers to call in and give us their questions, their comments on this issue. The U.S. government suing the state of California over its immigration laws. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. You can go to Twitter and Facebook as well. Before we get to your calls, let's listen to the Attorney General, Javier Becerra, on the California laws. Here he is.
California is in the business of public safety. We're not in the business of deportations. I believe it's a low blow. I believe it's a low blow for the Trump administration to deny our men and women who wear the badge the funding they need to keep us all safe by coercing us to try to do what they want us to do. That is not a good public safety technique, to try to coerce us to do what they want us to do. In California, we don't confuse coercion with cooperation. Neither should the Trump administration. I look forward to making these arguments in court, and we will continue to stand up for our police and our sheriffs, whose funding has been threatened by the Trump administration, and for the policies that have we've enacted to increase trust in our communities and that our officers and sheriffs are sworn to protect. We intend to make sure public safety is job one for law enforcement in California. We respect the federal government's right to take on immigration enforcement.
California Attorney General there. Jessica Vaughan, your response.
Well, this is the primary argument that's been used, but really both on the left and right, against the federal government's issue here. They're saying that the 10th Amendment specifically prohibits the federal government from commandeering state and local resources to do its work. But that's not really what's happening with immigration enforcement, and that argument was rejected in this 1996 lawsuit that I mentioned before that New York City brought. The federal government is not forcing local governments to do something on its behalf. What they are seeking is, and what the federal law requires, is that state and local governments cannot prohibit police officers or local government officials, or in the case of California, private employers, from cooperating with the feds in a lawful manner. And so that's really key to this. And the government is also saying that California cannot substitute its judgment or implement an immigration policy that's different than the federal government has, and that, very importantly here, they cannot single out immigration authorities for non-cooperation policies when they wouldn't dream of interfering with the U.S. Marshals or another state government or the FBI or the DEA. They're really singling out immigration authorities for non-cooperation because they disagree with the federal government's enforcement of this law, which of course is very important to many Americans. It's not an obsolete law that doesn't deserve to be enforced. It protects job opportunities and public safety and so on. And so they're seeking to enjoin this law, and there are the three laws of California, and especially because Attorney General Becerra, whom we just heard from, has threatened employers and threatened law enforcement agencies with prosecution if they cooperate with ICE or with the Border Patrol. So this is a very difficult situation for California employers. If they're notified by ICE, for example, that ICE wants to inspect their payroll records for illegal workers, many of them would cooperate willingly with that, but the California government is saying, no, you can't. So they're in a position where they have to either violate federal law or violate state law. And California sheriffs are in the same position, and that's why they have opposed the California law. They want to cooperate with ICE, but they are not allowed to do so. They don't want, sanctuary policies result in the release of criminals. ICE's priority for enforcement is that small fraction of the illegal population or of other non-citizens who are causing problems in the community, who are committing crimes. And that's their target for enforcement. And law enforcement agencies in California know that, and they want to be able to work together. They know that it's important for law enforcement agencies to work together. And so that's why they opposed the California legislation and don't want to be in this difficult situation of being caught between these two responsibilities of following, potentially being prosecuted by their own attorney general versus lawfully cooperating with immigration authorities.
We'll go to Louisville, Kentucky. Rob is joining us, independent. You're first, Rob. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I think Sessions is not going far enough. He's going to have to try Jerry Brown for treason. And then once you convict him of that, because Jerry Brown, he's breaking the law, and the illegals are breaking the law. Try him for treason. Once you get him, then convict him. No money time, no money fine, no jail time, deportation for life. So you have to cut the cancer out of the body or the body dies.
All right, Jessica Vaughan, let's take Rob's point.
Well, there's no doubt there are many American citizens, criminals especially, that it would be, many people think would be better off in another place. But we have a lot of different kinds of people in our country, and that's what makes our country great. What ICE is trying to do is go after those criminals who are not citizens, because we can remove them from our communities and prevent them from disrupting our communities and committing more crimes and more harm in our communities. Those are the ones that ICE is going after. And I think the Department of Justice has a good strategy here, that Sessions wants to establish these principles and I'm sure this is going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that will go a long way in addressing the proliferation of sanctuary policies across the country, because once these principles are established and decided through our federal courts, that will be a roadmap for dealing with all of the other sanctuary policies that are causing problems.
Well, let's listen to the governor, Jerry Brown, his reaction to the Attorney General Sessions' announcement this week.
This is completely unprecedented for the chief law enforcement of the United States to come out here and engage in a political stunt, make wild accusations, many of which are based on outright lies. That's unusual. And particularly a fellow coming from Alabama talking to us about secession and protecting human and civil rights. I do think this is pure red meat for the base, and I would assume, but this is pure speculation, that Jeff thinks that Donald will be happier with him, and I'm sure Donald will be tweeting his joy at this particular performance. But it's not about law enforcement, it's not about justice, and it really demeans the high office to which he has been appointed.
Jessica Vaughan, let's take unprecedented and based on lies.
No, the impact of sanctuary policies is real in California, and we have seen too many cases where criminal aliens who had already been convicted of serious crimes, felons, violent crimes, who had been arrested by local authorities, that ICE discovered through fingerprint sharing that takes place through a program called Secure Communities, that issued a notice to these law enforcement agencies that they wanted to take custody of them The local agencies ignored that, released these people back to the streets, and they unfortunately went on to commit horrific crimes in which people have literally been killed because of sanctuary policies, because these criminal aliens were on the street. And that's a problem. There have been 10,000 criminals, deportable criminals that ICE has identified that sanctuary policies have released who have gone on to commit additional crimes. And these are needless crimes, needless victims. I estimate that about 5,000 of them are probably in California. And so there is a real potential for harm to the community that is caused by these sanctuary policies. They're not fake. They're adopted for political reasons, not public safety reasons. And that's why the federal government really has to step in here, not just to preserve its authority, but to prevent these kinds of things from happening.
Stephen, in Charlotte, North Carolina, Democrat.
Yes, how are you doing today? Thank you for taking my call, by the way. I have some serious concerns about all this. For one thing, my main concern, of course, is the White House. I'm very unhappy with the White House and their chaos and everything. I think we've got a horrible president, but nevertheless, that's besides the point. I don't dislike him. I don't hate him. He has done some good things. But my whole point is why is it that every time there's an illegal alien, as they're referred to, in this country, being blamed for every single solitary little thing that happens in crime, when just as many Americans who are legal citizens in this country commit just as horrific crimes as well? Now, I will say this. I do agree with tightening up the borders. I do agree with getting rid of the MS-13 and the violent people and stuff like that. But you will find that most of these people that have come here, like the DACA recipients, for example, the DACA people, they are good people. They are hardworking people. They are decent people.
Okay, Stephen, let's get a response. Jessica Vaughan.
Sure. I mean, that's what I have found through my research is that immigrants or illegal immigrants are neither more nor less likely to commit crimes than anybody else. That's what the data shows. That's what my research has found. And again, that's why it's important to emphasize that ICE is primarily going after that small fraction of people who are in the country illegally who are committing crimes. That's what this is about. Their priorities for deportation. But it also has to be acknowledged that allowing illegal employment causes a lot of problems as well. It denies job opportunities for Americans, and these turn out to be those Americans who, for whatever reason, haven't had the benefit of a lot of education and so are in direct competition for scarce jobs that they are qualified for, that they need to support their families. And so that's why it's important to go after illegal employment as well. And it's often exploitative for the illegal worker, and that needs to be shut down. That's a very serious problem. And so ICE is the agency that does that, and they need the ability to go into employers and check paperwork and make sure that U.S. workers and legal immigrants are not being bypassed by employers who are illegally hiring people in the country who are not authorized. And that's a huge magnet for illegal immigration. That's what keeps these criminal smuggling organizations wealthy and what keeps them making money. So that as long as people think that they can come here to work illegally and get away with it, they're going to keep trying, and that's very dangerous, and we cannot allow that as a country. So that's, why immigration laws need to be enforced, why ICE needs the ability to do its job, and why the state cannot substitute its judgment for the federal government's in this area of the law.
Orange Park, Florida. David, a Republican.
Yes, I wanted to ask if local or state officials can be held criminally responsible if they illegally harbor illegal immigrants that ICE is looking for, and they don't turn them over. Can they be held criminally responsible?
Okay, Jessica Vaughan.
That's a good question. Yes, federal law says that no one may harbor or shield an illegal alien from detection by the feds. And there is a provision in the law for that. And I think in certain situations, there are officials who should be held to task for that. When you have a situation like the mayor of Oakland, who basically tips off the entire community that ICE is going to be doing an operation in her area, allowing criminal aliens to, go back into the woodwork so they don't get discovered by ICE, that a lot of people believe that was a criminal act. Or when a sheriff knowingly allows a criminal alien to be released that has been the subject of a detainer, a lawfully issued detainer that was issued on the basis of fingerprints, where it's clear that this person should be subject to removal, and they let them go anyway, and that person commits a horrible crime. They should be held responsible for that, and we may see some of those types of prosecutions. The Department of Justice is looking into a possible prosecution against the mayor of Oakland for what she did.
Royal Oak, Michigan. Jim is watching an independent. Hi, Jim.
Yes, I have one comment. You say that ISIS only goes after the criminals. There was a case of this man. He came here when he was 10 years old. He's been here 30 years. He was married, had children. ISIS picked him up and deported him. Now, to me, that man was as American as me, you, and many Americans, and as to our DACA people. They're good Americans,
Okay, well, Jim, we'll take your point. He's saying it's not just criminals that ICE is going after.
Well, yes, what I said was that ICE's priority is the criminals, but in addition, there are people in this country who have been deported before, maybe multiple times, who keep coming back, or people who have had their day in immigration court, and an immigration judge has found that there's no basis for them to be able to stay here, that they don't qualify for a green card, and that they need to go home. These are all legitimate targets for ICE also. It represents only a small fraction of what ICE is doing, but this is important to preserve the integrity of our legal immigration system, because it's not fair to let people just stay here. Even, most illegal immigrants are fine people, but our immigration law as set by Congress doesn't say that anyone who is a hard worker or a nice person or who has been here for a certain amount of time gets to stay. We have to, if an immigration judge says you don't qualify to stay here, then that order has to be enforced, or the millions of legal immigrants who are waiting for their turn to come here through our legal immigration system, who were sponsored by relatives or by employers, it's not fair to just enforce the rules on them. There needs to be a system with some integrity that's predictable and that's going to be enforced so that we can have a legal immigration system that everyone has confidence in.
Let's go to Yolanda, Columbus, Georgia, Democrat.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Ms. Vaughan, I have a couple of questions, and I'll try to be very, very brief. I was wondering, through your research, can you tell me approximately how many illegal immigrants are in the United States that did not cross from the southern borders, probably came into LAX, JFK, Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson? Do you have any idea on that?
We do. It's hard to estimate, but there are a number of reliable estimates out there. It appears that about 40% of the people who are illegally resident in the country, that's about 12 million people, maybe a little bit less, about 40% of them, maybe slightly more now, came in on a visa and did not leave, or a visa waiver, and did not leave when their time was up. We're just now starting to get better information on that, but it's a sizable percentage of the illegal population, and that's one reason we have to do more with worksite enforcement, so that if there's no possibility for them to get a job or stay here as if they were legal, then they will not have any incentive to overstay their visas. But that also needs to be a part of enforcement, and that's the kind of illegal immigration that the wall is not going to stop.
Yolanda, your second question.
And my second question was, because I support overhaul of immigration, but it can't just be one sector or people that's coming in through the southern borders, because when we hear in all the political banter and all the research, we talk about the southern border, and when we know that there are a lot more people here illegally than just those who come across from the southern border.
Okay,
but
That's right.
So Yolanda, we'll leave it there. Let me go to Edward, who's in Keyport, New Jersey, a Republican. Edward, your question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if this was a backdoor way to set court precedent to go after the legalized marijuana states and possibly asset forfeiture and whatnot. Thank you.
Well, the enforcement of those, there may be some relevance because those are federal laws. And, you know, one of the points that the Department of Justice is making is that a state cannot substitute its laws for those of the federal government in certain areas of the law. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in drug law or asset forfeiture, but you know, there may be some crossover of these principles. I just don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Okay. Bill, in Canton, Illinois. Bill, an independent. You're on the air.
Good morning, C-SPAN. I'm 67 years old, and I always voted Democrat. But I voted for Donald Trump because the way the Democratic Party protected, and their main platform was protect illegal immigrants. And when I heard Chelsea Clinton give a speech saying that her mother, if she got elected, would grant medical benefits for illegals under the Affordable Care Act. But my main statement is one way that the government could stop this is if they would publish the names of the people they're looking for, that ICE is looking for, the criminals, and then if they commit a crime, the residents of California would have the right to sue the state for not letting those criminals be apprehended.
Jessica Vaughan.
Well, that's an interesting point, and that's something that's been very frustrating for the families of people who were harmed by criminal aliens who were released by sanctuary policies, that they seem to have had no redress or ability to sue. For example, the family of Kate Steinle, who was killed by a released criminal alien released by San Francisco sanctuary policy, tried suing and has not succeeded. There's a bill now before Congress that was introduced by Representative Goodlatte and Labrador of the House Judiciary Committee that would provide a private right of action for people harmed in certain situations, very serious situations, where it can be determined that it was because of a sanctuary policy. And that's part of a larger bill that may get, you know, we hope will get some consideration in the House actually very soon. So we'll see what happens with that.
Elizabeth, Turners Falls, Massachusetts, on our line for Democrats.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. On Democracy Now! This morning, there was a clip showing ICE Border Patrol agents tearing away a mother, she looked to be in about her 30s, tearing away from her 3 daughters who were crying and screaming, and literally throwing her into a Border Patrol vehicle, and said that she was a criminal because she crossed the border illegally. Now, it seems to me that there has got to be a better way to deal with someone like her, and this happens all the time. I mean, there was a gentleman a few calls back that talked about a man who had to leave his family, who were also crying, and people like you make the excuse all the time that, or the justification that that's the law. But Congress makes no effort to overhaul the immigration system to avoid this kind of tearing up of families. And I think it's a nation that is supposed to be Christian. This is about the most unchristian thing that could be done. And I blame the president and everybody else who supports him in this for this horrible behavior.
Okay, Ms. Vaughan.
I'm sure that was hard to watch. I don't know the circumstances of that or, you know, what the Border Patrol's reason was for handling that case the way it did. Now, sometimes there are people, smugglers, who are bringing in children who are not their own. And, you know, the real problem here is that when we fail to enforce our immigration laws, which have an important function, as I described, then there's an incentive for people to try to cross the border illegally. And they are going to keep doing it as long as they think that they can get a job here, that they can live here without any problem. And that's why people keep turning over their life savings to these criminal smuggling organizations that put them in danger to cross the border illegally. That's why, I think it's wrong for us to incentivize that kind of behavior by not enforcing our law. And this influx at the southern border right now from Central America, with a lot of families and people sending their kids unaccompanied to be taken by smugglers to cross into the United States because they've heard that there's going to be an amnesty for young people, for example, or because they've heard that they will be released and allowed to join friends and family who've come illegally before, to wait for an immigration hearing that's going to take place years in the future. These are dysfunctional parts of our immigration system that need to be corrected so that people will not make that dangerous choice, and that we, can have a more orderly system of immigration, and not have this constant pressure at the southern border. I think that is a moral obligation that we have as a nation to send that message that our laws are going to be enforced. They're going to be enforced humanely, but don't go to the trouble of trying to come here illegally, because you will be sent home. There's no point in spending your money on that.
John, McKinleyville, California, Republican. You're next.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. You touched on this earlier. What happens in California doesn't necessarily stay in California. These criminal illegal immigrants aren't necessarily going to stay in California. They're going to filter out, many of them, into the rest of the country. And that's why the federal government has to have the authority to make and enforce our immigration laws, because what
Oops, John, I apologize. I thought you were done there. Jessica Vaughan.
Yes, that's a good point, and that's why the Constitution and our founders gave authority over immigration policy to the federal government, not to allow each individual state to come up with their own policies. And that's why this case is so important, to clarify that states cannot nullify federal law or substitute their judgment, that there's a national interest here. He's right. I mean, if someone is released in California, they can go to Nevada, Arizona, wherever, make their way to the East Coast. That's why border security at the southern border or the northern border is important to people in Iowa and Georgia as well, that this affects all of us as a country, and it's appropriate to have a federal immigration policy that, by the way, Congress decides, not the president.
James, Marysville, Washington, Independent.
Good morning, Greta.
Morning.
I'd like to have a definition of harboring. She keeps saying harboring and switching it with another word, which isn't true. And I'd like to ask another question about whatever happened to the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, harboring and the 10th Amendment. Jessica
Sure.
Vaughan.
Under immigration law, harboring is shielding someone from detection by federal immigration authorities, and that is a crime, and that can be, maybe paying for someone's smuggling fee and putting them up on your property and employing them. That's a form of harboring. Or it could be taking someone out the side door of the courthouse when you know that ICE is there to arrest them, and that that they're waiting to carry out their lawful responsibility. So it can take different forms, and I would not be surprised if in the next few years we see this further defined by cases that come up in federal court. As far as the commandeering argument goes, the 10th Amendment concern that you raised, obviously that's a legitimate question and going to be discussed as part of this case, but it has been established that simply asking for cooperation and asking that local police or other officials not be prohibited from communicating with immigration authorities, that's not really commandeering. That's not what the federal government wants, is not to force police or other officials to do their work. They just want them to cooperate with ICE and the Border Patrol as they would with any other law enforcement agency in the country or world, and not obstruct the feds from doing their legitimate job that Americans want to see enforced, and that has an important purpose. So it's been found in the courts that this is unlikely to be a situation of commandeering, since ICE is not demanding. Now, they may impose consequences on jurisdictions that don't comply. For example, they're seeking to withhold federal law enforcement grants from sanctuaries. But that's not exactly commandeering. It's not coercing. And I think there is good case law to back up the administration's position on that.
Beth is watching in Evanston, Illinois, Democrat. Good morning. Your question or comment?
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment for everybody listening. The Center for Immigration Studies is not a nonpartisan group. I doubt you would find, any Democrats or independents who believe in this. And also, it was identified, and I was just looking up the research, so I haven't come to a decision yet, but it was identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group. And if you look at some of their headlines, with all due respect to your speaker, I don't believe that the headlines are based on facts.
Okay, well, Beth, let's get a response.
Well, I think my colleagues who are Democrats and our board members who are Democrats would probably take objection to her characterization of us, but we certainly are, and your audience can look into it. The Southern Poverty Law Center was once a reputable organization that did some important work, but unfortunately they've veered off into trying to blackball organizations that disagree with their point of view and really smear my organization and others as hate groups, which is really unfortunate because it distracts from the real groups that do exist in our society who are hateful and carry out a hateful agenda. But our agenda is not based on hate. It's based on concern for those Americans and legal immigrants who are harmed by illegal immigration, on the need to have a good immigration policy that benefits our country and benefits immigrants and makes us a strong country, and that our current laws are not doing that, and that people are genuinely harmed when we fail to enforce immigration laws or have a legal immigration system that doesn't work for our country. So that's what motivates us, not hate for any particular group. It's really important to make sure that people understand that while there may be negative consequences to immigration, that immigrants deserve to be treated with respect, that they are people, and that we can enforce the rules of our immigration system without violating anyone's civil rights or demeaning them as people.
Let's get in one last call here. Mark, who's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, independent.
Hi. I'm an independent. I'm a very left-leaning independent, and I have a very big interest in immigration because my wife is an immigrant who recently got a green card. It's ironic that the woman before me called your guest on exactly the same thing I was calling about, and to be quite honest, I think she started her initial presentation to you, Greta, with a lie when you asked her what direction does your group come from, and she said, "Oh, we're nonpartisan, et cetera, et cetera." The Center for Immigration Studies basically, it's nonprofit and they're nonpartisan in the fact that they are not hooked up out in the open with any political party, but it is
or enclosed
geared towards cutting down on immigration.
Well, so Jessica Vaughan, where can viewers go on your website to find your studies? And take his last point, geared toward cutting down immigrants.
Sure. No, immigration, not immigrants.
Immigration.
Everything we do is on our website at cis.org, and I hope people will go there for information. We would like people to look at all of our work. We're proud of it. but it is not animated by hate or dislike of immigrants. It is motivated by a desire, really a need, to have an immigration policy that benefits our country, not special interests, benefits Americans, and so that we can admit immigrants who are going to be self-sufficient and contributing to our country and making it great, but that the levels of immigration that we have now are too high and causing distortions in the labor market, causing Americans to be displaced from opportunities or see their wages depressed, that too much of it is happening unlawfully. And this is causing problems. It can be a risk to national security to not know who's coming and going. These are all the reasons why we need to get better control of our immigration policy. And we do think that the numbers of legal immigrants need to be reduced, primarily by reining in chain migration a little bit. And emphasizing skills that immigrants bring from all over the world to contribute to our country.
Well, Jessica Vaughan, thank you very much for your time. Policy Studies Director for the Center for Immigration Studies. Appreciate the conversation this morning.